200 former S-21 staff became prisoners at Duch. In addition, it appears that S-24 staff were sent to Duch. However, it is difficult to establish the precise number with any accuracy. Duch also held other Cambodians, including former Khmer Republic soldiers and officials. There is also evidence that a number of Cambodian minority groups, including Cham, were also detained. A number of foreign nationals were also imprisoned at S-21, including Vietnamese, Thais, Laotians, Indians, and Westerners. The largest group of foreigners detained was Vietnamese. The list records at least 400 Vietnamese, of which approximately 150 were recorded as prisoners of war, and at least 100 were clearly civilians. Their presence is also confirmed by other evidence, including photo witness interviews, written confessions, and transcripts of radio broadcasts. The first recorded arrest of someone described as Vietnamese was on 7 February 1976, and their number increased as the conflict with Vietnam escalated. Duch admitted he was aware of the existence of armed hostilities with Vietnam from mid-April 1975 to at least 6 January 1979. He acknowledged that Vietnamese civilians and soldiers were detained at S-21 and estimated that they numbered in the hundreds.
Regarding S-24, too few records have been found to precisely determine the total number of people sent there. Nevertheless, it appears that there were several hundred people working at any one time, an estimate which Duch confirmed. Several witnesses state that men, women, and children were all held there. According to Duch, there were two main categories of persons at Prey-Sar: persons whose relatives were considered suspect, and subordinates of arrested cadre. There were also combatants from various units and personnel from numerous ministries and offices around Phnom Penh, together with members of their families. Despite some evidence to the contrary, Duch stated that no foreigners were sent to Prey-Sar. B. Arrest and transfer to S-21. According to Duch, no one could be sent to S-21 without a decision of the party. Duch explained that for the arrest of the members of the Central Committee, the decision had to be made by its standing committee. For others, Duch claimed that his superior, Person J, called the head of the relevant unit for discussion and a joint decision on arrest. Duch declared and witness A assumed that for people coming from other regions, the decision to arrest was always made by the Central Committee, which contacted the relevant zones, sectors, or districts in order to remove persons implicated by confessions. Duch specifies that, with the exception of important prisoners, he generally had no grasp of the specific rationale behind the imprisonment of the persons at S-21. Moreover, Duch insisted S-21 had no right to arrest anyone, adding that, in general, he was merely informed by the upper echelon of the arrest of prisoners so as to be ready to receive them. In fact, it did appear that prisoners were most often brought in by their units. Nevertheless, there is evidence that S-21 personnel did carry out arrests. When S-21 arrested persons outside the security office perimeters, but still within Phnom Penh, witness B explained that in some cases the unit arrested the person, but in other instances the persons were already arrested and the unit was responsible solely for their transfer to S-21. Witness B explained that he was sent outside of Phnom Penh to bring prisoners to S-21 several times, and each time he received a list of persons to arrest from Duch. Witness C confirmed that he also transported persons from Battambang with person I in 1977. He further noted that he once drove 2 prisoners from the Independence Monument to the entrance of S-21. According to witness B, Duch provided the names of those persons to be arrested, where the arrest would take place, and how many forces were required to effect the arrest and transfer of cadre brought to S-21. Witness B further maintained that during arrest, that Duch was the one who told us the plans and the names, and person C made the arrangements along with the messenger of Duch. Duch has admitted that, where necessary, the S-21 special unit left Phnom Penh with an order of the Central Committee and carried a special laissez-passer signed by Son Sen, which authorized them to bring prisoners back to Tuas Lang. However, Duch specified that this system was later abandoned, and the role of S-21 was simply to receive prisoners, not to arrest them. Even so, the only cadre at S-21 authorized to communicate with the upper echelon, it was necessarily Duch's role to implement and disseminate orders to arrest. Vietnamese prisoners of war were generally arrested in or near the main conflict zone on the border with Vietnam, and Duch declared he was informed of their arrival by means of a list transmitted by either person J or person Q, his direct subordinate and former chief bodyguard of Pol Pot. He further stated that S-21 was never in charge of the transportation of Vietnamese from the battlefield, as this was undertaken by the unit that arrested them. On the contrary, witness B declared that Duch twice sent him to the battlefield at Svai Rieng in 1977 and 1978 to transport Vietnamese soldiers to S-21. In addition, witness D was sent to work at the border in 1977 and declared that he saw Vietnamese prisoners of war taken from the battlefield by S-21 personnel in S-21 trucks. C. Duch's role in arrest. Some sources suggest Duch personally played a role in a number of decisions to arrest. For example, at times he received direct reports from outside military and administrative units concerning arrest. There are also records of numerous written communications between Duch and Division 502 Secretary Person R concerning the transfer of prisoners. Yet, when questioned on this point, Duch explained that instructing Person R to address letters to him in this manner was a tactic used by Son Sen and Person J to avoid revealing their names. Duch explained that on the 16th of September 1976, he attended a military meeting of Divisions 290 and 170, the purpose of which was to plan arrests. Those present included Son Sen and Person S. According to Duch, this meeting was called because there were an exceptional number of arrests to be carried out within a single unit. He admits to attending 2 such meetings, adding that the upper echelon would occasionally consult him before arresting people. especially for important party members. Duch explained how decisions concerning arrest took account of the need for secrecy and subterfuge to avoid leaks and ensure that there was no possibility of resistance, especially when large numbers of persons were to be arrested from one place. In such case, Duch declared that he asked Person C to talk with the person in charge of the unit to calm the personnel and facilitate orderly arrests. Duch explained that the decision to arrest people was often based on S-21 confessions, which implicated them as traitors. He has admitted at aiding Son Sen and later Person J in the arrest of perceived enemies by providing them with summarized confessions detailing those persons who had been implicated. Duch not only reported details of the confessions to Son Sen, but also discussed strategies and targets for arrest. Duch stated that as a result of these reports, the important persons mentioned in confessions were sent to S-21 almost without exception, although many less important persons were not arrested. Witness A alleged that Duch's power to propose arrest by reporting to the upper level extended to other cases as well. He gave the example of Person T, the then chairman of the Energy Committee, who was arrested following a report by Duch. Duch recognized that Person T was arrested, but stated that this was not a result of his report. At arrests, for example, Person K was arrested in Duch's house. Similar arrests occurred no more than one occasion. Duch said that they sent people in from afar to be arrested at my place. In the case of arrest of Person P, there were 3 people involved: me, Person C, and Person P. I was in command of the arrest. Witness B and former interrogator Witness E claimed that Duch sometimes led arrests in Phnom Penh. Although Duch denied ever personally arresting anyone, he admitted sometimes taking personal charge of important prisoners. D. Arrest of S-21 personnel. S-21 personnel were also arrested and either sent to Presaw for re-education or detained at Tuol Slang. Cadre could be sent to Presaw for minor mistakes or simply be monitored, especially when someone they knew arrived as a prisoner at S-21. For more serious mistakes, such as allowing a prisoner to escape, commit suicide, or otherwise die before the completion of an interrogation, the person responsible could be designated as a traitor to the revolution and detained. Some witnesses suggest, however, that for the majority of S-21 personnel arrested, especially those from Division 703, arrest occurred without any indication of the serious mistake. Witness B declared that only Duch could give orders to arrest S-21 personnel. He stated, if prisoners implicated people from 703, Duch had them arrested, interrogated, and killed. There were orders from Duch. At this place, there was only Duch who made the decisions. The witness provided specific examples of S-21 cadre who were arrested at the orders of Duch. They included Person U, chairman of the defense company; Person V, a company chairman who later moved to interrogation; Person W from company level; and later Person X from interrogation. Witness B specified that all of these people are dead. I do not know what they were charged with. Duch countered that although the S21 committee was competent for the first form of purge, whereby personnel was sent to S24, only Son Sen and later Person Che were competent for the second form of purge, whereby personnel was sent to S21. However, he did acknowledge that he was the only person who could report mistakes to the upper level, and that he did so whatever a report came to him from Person C. He claimed that he did this to avoid being implicated himself, since everyone, fearing for their lives, surveyed everyone else. When asked whether those he reported were always arrested, Duch replied, "If I remember well, there never were any exceptions. I always reported to the superiors and they always ordered the arrest of the person implicated." E. Conditions of detention at Tuls Lang. The reconstruction conducted at Tuls Lang on 27 February 2008 allowed further clarification of the detention conditions. Prisoners entered S21 on nearly a daily basis. They were then brought inside the prison, generally blindfolded and handcuffed. Prisoners were registered and lists of their names were compiled by former S21 cadre Person H. Prisoners were required to provide information regarding their biographies, which were then summarized. They were typically not informed of the reason for their arrest. Photos were taken of the newly arrived prisoners, one generally included a number and sometimes their name and date of arrest. According to Duch, these photos were taken on instructions from Son Sen to aid in recapture of any escapees. Guards then took the prisoners to their cells. Prisoners were kept in restraints nearly 24 hours a day. The S21 detention facility had both small individual cells and larger collective cells where prisoners were chained side by side with their legs shackled. Witness F explained that he could not stand up. Female prisoners generally remained unshackled unless they created problems. Prisoners were kept under permanent armed guard. Guards, both inside and outside the detention facilities, were instructed to be vigilant in preventing escape attempts. However, it appears that a few detainees may have successfully escaped. Stringent rules governed the lives of prisoners and deprived them of their most basic human needs. They were not permitted to speak to each other or to the guards. When prisoners first arrived at S21, they were often stripped of their clothes, leaving just their underwear. They were not permitted to exercise or leave their cells. No bedding was provided to the detainees, while some privileged prisoners were allowed old mats or mattresses to sleep on. The majority of inmates to keep them alive so that their interrogation could be completed. Evidence suggests that S21 personnel performed medical experimentation on prisoners. Duch explained that research for prisons was carried out upon the orders of the Central Committee, more precisely upon those of Person J. He declared, "I know now that regarding medical matters, there were 3 forms of crimes against humanity in S21. Autopsies practiced on living persons, blood taking and medicine testing." One confession contains an annotation from Duch which reads medical experiments. Duch explained that this annotation referred to new medicines pre-21, the manufacture of medicines based on ancestral formula started. The living conditions described above, combined with detention, interrogation, and the disappearance of prisoners, severely impaired the physical and psychological health of many of the detainees and in many instances caused their deaths. Witness H reported that 8 or 9 prisoners died during 1 month in his cell. Some prisoners also attempted to commit suicide. F. Detention conditions at prison were sent to hard labor or tempering. It was staffed by S-21 cadre and combatants. Duch stated the slang. In view shared by witness J, who was himself sent to S-24 for re-education. Duch added that detainees and staff at Prison could not move around freely without authorization and claimed that this rule also applied to him, a fact which other witnesses corroborated. However, it is clear that those who were sent to S-24 were deprived of their liberty. They were strictly guarded both at work and night. Witnesses indicated that persons sent to prison were separated into 3 levels, 1 for light tempering, 2 an intermediate level, and 3 which was for the most serious cases. Deprivation of liberty was more severe for people in level 3, as they were kept shackled at night and were not permitted to live in ordinary houses. For us, it appears that only some of them were locked up at night. Former detainees stated that there were 2 meals a day, 1 at noon and 1 in the evening, with only a few exceptions. Prisoners claimed that the food at prison was insufficient. Despite this, Duch acknowledged delivering surplus rice to the Central Committee. Again, persons in level 3 received lower rations than others. Duch declared that he could not modify the food regime and allowing the prisoners was a deliberate policy at S-24. Detainees, including women and children, were forced to work in the rice fields, fish, grow vegetables, transplant rice, build paddy dikes, dig canals, and carry soil to make ponds. Several witnesses said they worked day and night, 7 days a week, and were not permitted to rest during working hours. A typical day working at prison started at dawn, between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m., and finished between 10 p.m. and 12 midnight, with 2 hours to rest and eat. The work was carried out under the supervision of guards, who required detainees to be efficient and berated them if they worked slowly. When detainees were sick or late, or when their work was considered unsatisfactory, they were beaten and insulted. Prisoners were also punished for sexual misconduct, illness, or stealing. And former inmate witness K said he was beaten 2 or 3 times. He also stated that sometimes the guards punished detainees by starvation. Former S-21 staff member witness C, who was sent to S-24 for re-education, explained that he worked as hard as he could to improve himself, knowing without being told that if he did not, he would end up dead. Regular re-education meetings were held at prison, at which detainees were instructed to work quickly and efficiently, given political training, and were indoctrination and required to partake in self-criticism sessions where they were forced to concede their faults and those of others. The fear of being transferred, killed, or beaten was ever present. Disappearances during the night were common, and those persons taken away never returned. Duch did not deny that some Prasor detainees may have been transferred to Kaing Guek for execution, and evidence suggests that it was people from level 3 who were most likely to have been executed in this way. Some prisoners were also transferred to Tuol Sleng. The combined S-21 prisoner list names at least 571 persons transferred from S-24 to Tuol Sleng, although this clearly includes S-24 personnel as well as inmates. I would like Mr. Duch Pari to take over from Mrs. Woody. 2. Interrogation. The majority of prisoners detained at S-21 were systematically interrogated. Interrogations were conducted by S-21 personnel who were organized by Duch and his deputy into various teams. Evidence indicates that interrogators could not choose the prisoners they would question. Once tasked, interrogators took prisoners out of their cells handcuffed and blindfolded and relocated them into the interrogation rooms. Prisoners would then typically have their legs shackled to the table, and only then were their handcuffs removed to allow questioning and confession writing. The interrogators questioned the prisoners on their biographies and on the activities which led to their arrest. Not all of the interrogations led to a written confession. Interrogations took place every day from 7 to 11 a.m., from 2 to 5 p.m., and then from 7 to 11 p.m. There was no general principle regarding the number of times a prisoner was interrogated or how long an interrogation would last. The end came only when the confessions were considered completed. Prisoners could be interrogated repeatedly and forced to redraft their confessions numerous times. A number of witnesses observed Duch interrogating prisoners at S-21. Witness E said that interrogations conducted by Duch was commonplace. For example, the confession of person Y is annotated: first interrogator Duch, second interrogator person G. With respect to this confession, Duch admitted that he wrote the annotation but maintained he did not interrogate him. In fact, Duch insisted that person K was the only prisoner he interrogated at S-21, which he said he did on the order of Son Sen. Duch explained that he introduced 3 methods of interrogation: the cold, hot, and chewing methods. The cold method was interrogation through the use of propaganda without relying on torture or insults. The hot method expressly included insults, beatings, and other torture authorized by the regulations. The chewing method was an intermediate form which consisted of gentle explanations in order to establish confidence, followed by prayers to the interrogated person, continually inviting her or him to write. Torture would also be used. Witness E, who was on the chewing team, noted that torture was not necessarily used for the very beginning, but if the results were not satisfactory within 2 or 3 days, torture was used. Duch said that S-21 borrowed heavily from Security Center M13 with respect to interrogation techniques. while recognizing that M13 did not provide confession which reflected the truth. This was confirmed by witness A. Witnesses reported that M13 Duch personally controlled and often personally participated in the interrogation process. Evidence suggests that interrogators at M13 in the early 1970s frequently engaged in torture to extract confessions from prisoners. Several witnesses have said that Duch would personally torture prisoners at M13. In particular, it is alleged that Duch burned prisoners, beat them with bamboo, and submerged them in water. Systematic use of torture during interrogation. Duch confirmed that the use of torture with S-21 was systematic and noted that anyone taken for interrogation mostly could not avoid torture. The use of torture appears to have applied uniformly to all detainees without regard to the reason for their arrest. With the sole exception of witness A, torture was considered by every other interrogator. Furthermore, considerable documentation from S-21 revealed annotations relating directly to the use of torture. Duch explained, the situation was the following. For simple combatants, person C controlled everything and could order torture. For important prisoners, such as person O, Sun Sen gave me his orders and decided on the use of torture. 3 notebooks belonging to S-21 interrogators, the statistical list of Security Office S-21, politics, ideology, and organization, statistical list. The person F notebook attributed to person F and the person G, person Z notebook detained the regime of interrogation and torture at S-21. The statistical list incorrectly labeled the torture manual by some sources and reputedly containing the notes of an interrogator, included political and interrogation instructions which taught interrogators to break prisoner by propaganda or break him by torture. The manual also instructed interrogators, if Angka instructs not to beat, absolutely do not beat. If the party orders us to beat, then we beat with mastery, beat them to talk, not to die, to escape, not to become so weak and feeble that they fall ill and we lose them. Duch confirmed that the instructions and political ideologies contained in the person F notebook and in the statistical list accurately reflected his teachings and instructions and were primarily his thoughts. The use of torture were well known by staff throughout S-21. A guard, witness L, stated that he learned the principle of torture from Duch at the school from the company chairman, the platoon chairman. They said that the prisoners were enemies. If they did not answer, they could be tortured. The physical consequences of torture, for example, lacerations, bleeding, bruises, unconsciousness, and missing finger or toenails, were visible to the extent that nearly all of the former S-21 personnel interviewed considered that they were aware that torture was being carried out even without having personally witness specific acts. For example, witness M reported that most of the prisoners detained at S21 had injuries and their faces were swollen, and there were burns around their ears from electric shocks. Certain guards also declared that they personally saw or heard torture being carried out. The purpose of interrogations was to obtain a complete answer which included the prisoners' alleged crimes and identified other purported enemies of the regime. In respect to the Vietnamese prisoners, Duch indicated that the purpose behind their interrogation was to obtain confessions showing that Vietnam had invaded Cambodia with a view to integrating it into an Indo-Chinese federation. Unlike Cambodians, Vietnamese prisoners were often tape recorded, and some of their confessions were then broadcast on the radio for propaganda purposes. These are more than 50 extant transcripts of radio broadcasts of Vietnamese confessions on the case file. According to Duch, the purpose was not to interrogate a prisoner of war on Vietnamese military plans. However, witness A stated that they were routinely interrogated on the battlefield and combat situation. This statement, in connection with other remaining documents from S21, indicated that the interrogation of prisoners of war had a dual purpose, namely propaganda and intelligence gathering.
B. Duch's personal participation in torture. In his interviews before the co-investigating judges, Duch consistently denied ever torturing prisoners at S21. However, he admitted that while Deputy Secretary, he would sometimes intervene during interrogation sessions being carried out by S21 staff. In these instances,